everybody. Welcome to the next Speak Out Reach Out of spring semester. Today we have Dan Pickerl speaking on dealing with suicide. So come on up.
All right. Does anyone watch The Price is Right, actually? Okay, survey, question. Bob Barker fans or Drew Carey?
Good answer.
Okay, all right, sure. I'm a Bob Barker loyalist. I'm just saying, he's the old school guy, original. That's just my guy. But, so, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you very much for coming. So, my name is Dan Pickerl, and today I'm going to talk to you about dealing with suicide. So, I have 4 parts that I'm going to cover in my speech today. And so, just give you a little bit of background about myself. My name is Dan Pickerl, of course. I am a German political science double major, and I am from Naperville, Illinois. It's a southwest Chicago suburb. It's about an hour and a half, 2 hours from here, not too far. And so last year I studied abroad in Munich, Germany. So I was there from March all the way until the end of July. So dealing with my dad's death. So I was in Munich, and I had just gotten back from a day of sightseeing, and it was still in the orientation period, so I was just hanging out and having a good time. So then I got back to my room, and all of a sudden this note, it comes under my door. And so this note comes under my door, and I'm laying on my bed, I'm like, oh man, like this is such a long day, like I had so much fun, but I'm just exhausted, and I'm like, oh, like a note, like, okay, I guess something else is going on, or I need to go do something else. So the note comes under my door, and I open it up, and it asks me to immediately call my mom and then my program director. 2 big things. And so right then and there, I knew that just something wasn't right. Something was off, and I didn't know what it was. I actually thought that it was my grandfather who passed away. I thought, like, oh, I'm getting this note because my grandfather passed away. And he's in his 80s right now, and he suffered a stroke a few years ago, so I thought that, okay, like this is, it's his time. He never fully recovered from it, which is understandable. It made sense to me, and so that's something that I tried to accept right away. And so I thought that, okay, my grandfather died, it's unfortunate, it's something that I have to deal with, so it made sense. So figuring that, something was wrong, I was gonna call my mom. So I took a bunch of Euro change. I had this cup of Euro change that had like 1 pennies and like 2 cent pennies. They have those in Europe, and so I took a bunch of them. I went down to the payphone, and I called my mom from the payphone, which was right outside of our little Studentenstadt, or student city. And so a man's voice answers my mom's phone, and I thought, oh, like this is really strange. Why is a man's voice answering my mom's phone? And I thought it was my Uncle John, actually, my mom's brother, who lives in Maine. And I thought, oh, well, this is very interesting. Why is Uncle John with my mom? Why is he in Chicago? So it was actually one of the pastors from church who had answered the phone on behalf of my mom. And so my mom had said that I needed to come home immediately. And I was like, okay, what's going on? So I'm like, hey mom, what's going on? She's like, Daniel, you need to come home immediately. Dad has died. And I just yelled, what? Into the receiver. Like, I couldn't believe it. I was shocked. It was just such a strong feeling comes over you, and you don't know how to deal with that. And so I was just like frantic. I was panicking, just wasn't sure what was going on, and just completely lost, right there at a payphone on the other side of the world. And now my dad has died, and I didn't know what to make of it. It was such an incredible experience. So she said that I needed to come home. At this point, it was Saturday. This was Saturday night. So she said I needed to come home Sunday, the next day, or by Monday at the latest. And so then I called my program director, and he had already had figured that out. He had already knew, because my mom called the Detroit office, which called the Munich office, and so that's how they got contact with me. So he generously volunteered to drive me to the airport, which was incredibly thoughtful considering the high price of gas in Germany. So to make a quick comparison to the United States, Germany adds a lot of environmental taxes on gas, and so after converting out of the metric system in Germany and also from the euro to the United States dollar, Germans pay roughly $14 to $15 per gallon of gas in comparison to the US. So driving a car to the airport is a really huge deal. So this was a huge gesture of generosity, which I greatly appreciated. It was not, it's very direct driving, which is great, but of course you pay the price for it. In comparison, you could take the public transit, which is much cheaper, but it's not really as practical, and it doesn't necessarily go where you want it to or at the times that you want it to either. So I called one of my friends, and they got everyone together at my room really quickly because I was going to be leaving. I was going to be leaving for the U.S. again, and I didn't know if I was coming back or if I would or when. So I got all my friends over, which was great, and I called my mom back after things had started to settle down a bit. And I got my head together, which was good. And so I opened my door and I walk out onto this little porch. It's like a concrete cement porch, and it overlooks the city. Really beautiful. And I thought to myself as I was on the phone, I was like, oh, it was his alcoholism. It was my dad's alcoholism. He had alcoholism for some time, and I thought it finally got the best of him, and he killed himself in a car accident. I really did. That's how I thought that he died. But unfortunately not. And my mom said that he had, quote, taken his own life. And that's all that she could say. She could not at that point say the word suicide. So 2 quick footnotes about my dad. The first, of course, was he was an alcoholic. Ever since I was about 11 or 12, this was like 2001, 2002, I started drinking very heavily. And so his alcoholism definitely affected all of us in the family, and he would not every week, but it became more frequent that he would drive home from work drunk, and it was just a matter of time. To me, it was only a matter of time before he got in a car accident and killed himself or killed somebody else, and he would go to jail, and we would lose the house and get sued for everything that we had. I thought that this is very logical, and that's what happened. But that just simply was not the case. And then another footnote is, right then in my room in Munich is when I made the decision to actually come back to Munich. Because that's one thing, when someone dies and your life is put on pause, you're like, okay, how long am I going to take off work? Or how long am I going to be off of school, like college? And so right then and there, because my program was paid for, I made the conscious decision to return to Munich, return to Germany. And I thought that was the best thing for me. And so in total, I would be home in the US for 11 days. And I really think that was the best decision for me. So then we have my flight back to the US. So as I mentioned, my program director drove me to the airport in his wife's little Fiat 500. It is a small little red car, and it was such a hilarious experience. Because one thing you have to know about this guy, his name is Professor Dr. Hans Peter Zutter, and he's a really tall guy, but he is just a complete funny man, absolutely funny guy. One day he showed up, he walked into the offices wearing his lederhosen and smoking a pipe. It's just like who does that? This guy's so hilarious. And one of the things that I absolutely loved about him is that in all of his emails, he would always try to put a funny twist in it. So when he was planning our class backpacking trips through the Alps in southern Germany, he would sign his emails mit freundlichen Jodels, or with friendly Jodels. And I'm like, this guy's hilarious, So, he was just a nonstop riot. And I don't think he necessarily wants to admit it per se, but I think that, especially since he was taking me back to the U.S., or to the airport to go back to the U.S. since my dad had died, that he dressed up in his lederhosen, especially just for me. And so I know it was a small gesture, but I thought that was pretty cool. And so I was automatically in a good mood, the next morning, and I was like, okay, this is taking the edge off a bit, and I really appreciated it. It was very nice. So he was making jokes all the way to the airport. This guy is a funny guy. And so he would make a joke like how crazy the German drivers are, because it was early Sunday morning and no one is out on the auto. No one is out. And so the only people that are out are people that are commuting to the airport or someplace important, or the drag racers. And so, we would be in the right lane or the middle lane, and then this Audi comes 200 kilometers an hour, just zooming past us, which is 90, 100 miles an hour, some odd, and it was just so incredible. He was like, oh, dangerous drivers. It's like, oh, and there's an example. So I thought that was very funny. He made an obvious joke about his height difference with his wife. I mean, like, you have like this really tall, thin guy get into like a little Fiat 500. It was just like such a funny thing to see, because he was pretty squished. He was squishing that thing. And then of course my favorite one was his comparison to his wife's car to my Harley Davidson. I ride a Harley Davidson Sportster 1200, and so Fiat 500. The 500 is the engine size, and so he made the joke that my motorcycle has more power in just one piston than his entire car. And so I'm like, yeah, that's the good old American muscle. I was proud of that. So he made that joke, and I thought that was just funny. And I don't like to rub it in people's faces. I mean, I do if they're getting in mine, but I was respectful, and I just thought that this was a nice little gesture of him. So I appreciated it. So we got to the airport, and he properly sent me off. He gave me train tickets so I could take the S-Bahn back, which, not the most direct route, but it was something, and I appreciated the gesture. And then he hugged me. He hugged me and embraced me as his own son, and I think that was a huge moment for me. And that's a moment that I felt really close to him, and I felt that everything was going to be okay. One way or another, everything was going to be okay. So I didn't really sleep on the plane. I was just drowning in thought, and I thought about how I was the leader now. I was the leader of my family, how I was the only man left, and to some extent that actually hindered my grieving process. I think it really did, because I had to stay so protective of both my mom and my sister. It was something very difficult, and even now sometimes, it's hard because trying to protect my mom and sister, even though it's been just about a year. So I turned off the TV. I didn't want to watch any TV or anything. I couldn't concentrate on that, and I saw in my own reflection, I saw my dad, and that's just something you notice after someone dies. You see part of them in you, and so I thought that was very almost haunting, but not unnecessary. It was still something that I had to accept. And so there were two grim truths that I specifically had to address and embrace right away. The first is that we would have to sell the house. Of course, I knew as soon as Dad died, of course, we're gonna have to sell the house, which as of spring break, after a realtor change, is still on the market. And so we haven't sold the house yet, which is unfortunate, but we're trying to get through that. And then the other grim truth that I had to accept was that I would have to sell the motorcycle. And so I would have to sell my Harley, which of course, as of spring break, has been sold. So I no longer have that thing of mine, and that was my most prized possession. And so for that to be taken from me, I just felt cheated. I felt cheated throughout this entire experience, and how this could happen to me and traumatize me and change me in such a drastic way. It wasn't the same anymore. And I thought constantly, why me? Why did this have to happen to me? Why did this have to happen to me specifically? What did I do wrong? And so, as I would soon realize, I felt like I didn't have any control over anything. I felt like I lost it all. And I got very territorial really quickly, and I know that. The guy who answered my mom's phone, as I mentioned, he was a pastor from our church. And he's a great guy, very nice, very pleasant, but then it felt like he was trying to fill in for my dad or fill in for my role, so I got extraterritorial very quickly. And so that's something that I had a problem with, especially when he picked me up from the airport. He was driving my car, and so for my mom to be in the passenger seat and my sister in the back, and then me having to be in the back while this other guy, this man, is driving my car, it didn't feel right. And so it took a lot, trust me, it took a lot of restraint to keep me from physically pulling him out of the car. That's how territorial I got. It was a very difficult time. It was quite a challenge because this guy came in, and I felt like he was encroaching on my responsibility in my life, and that's something that I just wasn't going to have. So then there was the funeral. So I got home, and a few days later, I got home on Sunday afternoon, and the funeral was going to be on that Wednesday. So I had a few days to sort of just relax. But the funeral, it was a complete blur. It went by so quickly, and it was a day that I had thought that it would never come so young. You know, at that point I was only 21 years old, and so it's just something that you don't have to think about. You shouldn't have to fathom losing a parent at 21 years old, but unfortunately it happened. And so I always thought in my head that someday I would explain to my kids, like, oh, you know, like looking at my dad and their grandfather's casket, like, oh, you know, your grandfather lived a happy life, and, you know, it was his time to go. Just simply explain he lived a happy life, it was his time to go, and as people get older, it's the natural course of life and death, and that's something that I understood. But clearly this was not the case. This was unfortunately not the case in my situation. So I saw so many people come for my dad, which was such an incredible experience. So many people came for the funeral. And one of the things that I learned at my dad's funeral is that there were really great things said about my dad, which I really appreciated. And Christina, you specifically, do you remember Lynn saying how Lynn said that she likes funerals better because people are more sincere? You remember her saying that? That's something that I got to experience myself, and that's something that I had a really personal connection with, something that I realized right away. And so, you know, my dad had touched so many lives, and I thought, you know, this was such an incredible experience for my dad to have touched so many lives, in a very positive way, of course. And there was standing room only. It was completely filled all the way to the back, and I thought that was really incredible as a final way to send off my dad. And of the plenty of people that came that day, there were two specific groups of people that stood out to me specifically. They were my dad's entire hockey team, as well as the woman that he ate lunch with in the cafeteria in his building. So every Sunday night, my dad would would go and play ice hockey with a bunch of his friends. And these were, you know, friends that he had known just from all different works and walks of life, and he would play ice hockey with them every Sunday night as a goalie. And so when the last of my dad's teammates, they came through the line, they came through the visitation line, and the last one, I remember clear as day specifically, shook my hand and told me how proud he was of me, and explained that in just the 5 days that they had figured out, you know, my dad has died from when they learned the news to the funeral, my dad's hockey buddies had raised over $2,000 to the Wounded Warrior Project, and that was the charity of my choice. In lieu of flowers, you could donate to the Wounded Warrior Project, which was the charity of my choice, and they raised over $2,000, and I thought that was such an incredible way to remember and honor my dad, and that's something that he definitely would have wanted. If you don't know about the Wounded Warrior Project, just real quick, it's a nonprofit charity that helps injured veterans transition back into civilian life if you've been injured in combat. So, and then the other person was the lady who my dad ate lunch with in the cafeteria. And you know, my dad traveled a lot. He had business all over the world, and he would have lunches with everyone. But when he was in the office, he would go down to the cafeteria and you know, just casually meet with other people from the office, and you know, from the work complex, I should say. And it was a good experience because he had touched this woman in such a positive way. You know, this woman came up to me and said, you know, your dad was such a great guy, and although I only ate lunch with him maybe once a week at most, you know, it was such a positive experience, and he was such a positive role model and influence on her. And I thought, oh wow, you know, this is really touching that she was so moved by my dad, she came to the funeral. And so I thought that was a definite, you know, good closure sign for me. So having been a veteran, my dad had earned military honors from the Department of the United States Navy. So two people showed up for the funeral services for the military part. One was an enlisted sailor and another was an officer to present the honors. And as clear as day, I'll always remember, they played during taps, and they folded the flag as you would in the military. And they saluted my dad again, of course, and then turned around and presented the flag in front of my family, my mom in the center, me on her left side, and then my sister on her right side. And clear as day, I'll always remember, he said the exact words, "Ma'am, on behalf of the President of the United States, the Secretary of Defense, and a grateful American people, please accept this flag. Ma'am, I am so sorry for your loss." My mom accepted the flag and held it in her lap. On a more humorous note, as you see sometimes in the movies, as he was standing there, he was sort of confused who to give the flag to, because sometimes the male will take the flag when someone from the service has died. So I did the classic head nod, like, it's my mom, it's my mom. So I had to do the little nod, but he got it right away, which was very nice. So the aftermath. So I wanted to touch a bit about my background, about my dad's story personally. So my dad, he attended the United States Naval Academy from 1976 to 1980 and commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Navy and became an operator of a nuclear reactor on a nuclear submarine. And this submarine ran deterrence patrols around what was then the Soviet Union. And so he wasn't in the missile room per se, but he was in the nuclear reactor part. So just inspecting and operating and making sure, because it powers the submarine. So he got out of the Navy in 1985. So then after he got out of the Navy, he struggled a little bit to find a job, which is unfortunately a struggle that service members have to encounter. So he then decided to go to business school. So he went to business school at the University of Chicago Booth School of International Business and got his MBA. So upon graduating, he got a job offer at J&H Marsh & McLennan. And I'm pretty sure no one here knows about nuclear insurance at all, but they are a corporate conglomerate that is based in New York City on Wall Street. Wall Street, oh my God. No, okay. So my dad worked in the Chicago offices of Marsh & McLennan. And so he oversaw some of their nuclear insurance needs and got a pretty high-ranking role after the academy, which was great for him. But unfortunately, in October of 2004, Elliot Spitzer, the Attorney General of the state of New York, sued Marsh & McLennan for literally hundreds of millions of dollars amid allegations of rate rigging, corporate crime, and collusion, which were all part of this giant mess of complaints that Elliot Spitzer had filed against Marsh & McLennan. And so Marsh opted to settle the lawsuit out of court. And so the case never went to court, but unfortunately they had to pay the settlement, and that would mean thousands of people would lose their jobs. And so my dad was not eliminated right away, which was great for our family, but he was ultimately laid off. So after my dad was laid off, it took a little bit of time to get back on his feet. And so my dad and 3 other friends would go on to start their own company called the Global Risk Partners. And they're based in Oak Brook, Illinois, which is another western suburb, not as south as Naperville, but still on the west side. And he would become the head of the nuclear insurance division because there was only 4 people operating the company. So he would go and try to create a nuclear insurance plan for an investor in Marion, Illinois. It's a very small southern city in Illinois with a man named Harry Miller. And so, as you can imagine, nuclear reactors, they require a ton of insurance because of so many things that can go wrong with nuclear power. So my dad wanted to seize this opportunity because if he got that contract and the nuclear power plant would go up, then he would get the commission on that, and that would be a huge payout for our family. So he said at the beginning when he met this Harry guy that he was a hothead. He was a real hothead, and he had a temper even though he was 78 years old, and he was just an old, grouchy, mean person. And so it was just, he knew that something was off with this guy, and he always had a complex temper. He could curse you out one day and then be your friend the next day, and it was very, just one-sided. It was always this give and take. It was never, you're my friend or you're my enemy. It was always, somewhere in the middle. And so since his layoff in 2004, my dad worked with various fields like investment bankers, equipment manufacturers, specifically Siemens. They're a German-based company that manufactures a lot of nuclear power plants, equipment, and other information. And he even met with various politicians, of course, trying to get nuclear energy approved, especially in a state where nuclear energy might not be more of a friendly energy source. He met with many high-profile politicians, including U.S. President Barack Obama. And without making a political speech out of this, the project started in the Bush administration when things were still looking all right for nuclear engineering and nuclear energy. However, by the time that they had gotten everything together or were actually moving in a forward direction, which took about 2 to 3 years, the 2008 election had occurred and Barack Obama was elected president. And again, without making a political speech, President Obama didn't exactly have a nuclear-friendly agenda on his plan, and so this meant that my dad would have to face, of course, more obstacles by trying to get this power plant up and running and get the proper insurance, especially in coordination with the government, both state and federal, to get everything in order. So he just, he was up a creek, leave it at that. He and his company were up a creek, and so were the other investors. So after suffering endless setbacks to his project, it should have taken 3 to 4 years to finally get off the ground and have the contracts and break ground and everything like that. But the investors weren't sure, and then other competitors would come in, competitors to Siemens who wanted the equipment bid. There was always something that was going on, including the local politicians in Southern Illinois. That was a big hurdle for my dad and his partners to deal with. And so it was just one thing after another. It really was. So unfortunately, after yet another meeting with Harry went sour, he accused my dad of making backroom deals or under-the-table deals in attempts to gain profit out of the negotiations and collusions. So my dad gave it a few days and let Harry cool off and try and calm the temper, things like that. But a week had passed, and Harry, with his old guy grouchy temper, still was not budging in any way, and so he did not retract his allegations, and that unfortunately led to the downfall of my dad. So on April 27th, 2012, which last year was on a Friday, that is this upcoming Saturday, as told from my mother, my dad came home from work as usual. Everything seemed to be perfectly fine. Everything seemed to be normal. But he said, he went up to the bedroom and he said, "I have an errand to do." And my mom made dinner and she waited up like, okay, it's an errand, and where is he? What's he doing? And so he waited up, and finally she was like, okay, I'm done waiting. I'm just going to go to bed. You can have dinner later. Totally fine. So she got ready for bed, got into bed when she noticed his wallet was sitting on the nightstand and had a piece of paper sticking out of it, and it was a note. And so, and this note had the location of where my dad could be found. And so my dad drove out to a campground in the area of Northern Illinois University. And it was a campground that my Boy Scout troop had used to camp at when I was younger, still in scouting. And so with him, he brought his Bible. He had a really thick Bible. It had like 4 or 5 translations all in one, so it was a pretty thick book. The picture of both my sister and I from our childhood, and my mom's engagement picture, as well as a Colt 45 semi-automatic pistol. From my speculation, he drove out to the campsite where no one could find him, said some sort of prayer, maybe looked at a Bible verse or several or something along that matter, said a final farewell to my mom, my sister, myself, exited the car, shot himself over the right ear, killing himself. My mom called the police, of course, and they went out to NIU, out to that area, and they did find his body. It was exactly where he said it would be, and he was dead on arrival. So if any of you can take a single lesson from this presentation, it's just abusive relationships and bullying in general can only go on for so long. It's just everyone has their breaking point. And that's something that I want to emphasize. Every single person in this room has their own breaking point. And so after these years of up and down with Harry, from 2005 all the way until last year, this up and down, and finally got to my dad. He cracked. He reached his breaking point and he killed himself. He had the capacity to go on a shooting spree, like a mass murder, such as Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris, who shot up Columbine, but instead my dad took it out on just himself, specifically. And so, just bullying has major consequences. Bullying has so many consequences, and it was just as if an atomic bomb had exploded on my personal world. That's what it literally felt like. An atomic bomb had just blew up on me, and I was melting. And so, in the aftermath, some days were very difficult, of course. Some days I simply couldn't do any of my homework in Munich when I got back there. Some days I couldn't go on sightseeing or do something fun, even though my brain wanted to, but at the same time my heart was keeping me back and just in my room, and it was very dark and depressed. But it was good that I was still in Munich, because that was my biggest distraction, my biggest takeaway, to be removed from the situation specifically. So I returned to Munich, and I wanted to enjoy the rest of my experience to the best of my abilities. And I know that's something that my dad had wanted. He wanted me to enjoy my experience. And both in my head and in my heart, I knew that if I had just sulked around and sunk into a depression, then I would have wasted my time. I would have wasted my study abroad experience and have wasted my time. And that's just something that I didn't want, and that's something that my dad wouldn't want either. So you never truly know how much of an impact you have on someone's life. And that's something that I want to emphasize as well, in either direction, for better or for worse. And so it sounds really trivial and it sounds very middle school-esque, but just be a friend. That's all I can ask. Just be a friend to one another. Be a friend and take the time to stop and listen to one another, because I personally believe, out of this entire experience, that listening to my dad, or listening to what was going on in the grand context and the grand scheme of things, that could have been the difference between life and death. I really believe that. And so I just ask all of you to listen, to keep an open mind and open heart, and listen to one another. I like to think of myself as a generally friendly person. I'm a little shy, I'll admit that. But I like to again, believe that listening makes the difference. And so I like to be a listener. I strive to be a listener. So that's my goal. That's my strive out of this whole context, that out of something so terrible can come something good. I want to change myself and influence my peers and be a positive person, and go out in society and be a positive person for every single person here in this room, every person that comes in contact with me. I want to be a positive person, so that way I can make the difference. If that is the case, if someone is on a downward spiral, I want to make the difference. I want to be the difference. And like I said, you never know what kind of an influence you could have on anyone. And that's something that I wanted to emphasize. Suicide in general, it is nothing to be ashamed about. That is a complete stereotype, that suicide is something that someone has to be ashamed about. That's not true. If you've attempted suicide in the past, or otherwise a survivor of suicide like myself, it is nothing to be ashamed about. Please know that it is absolutely nothing to be embarrassed about or ashamed about. Those are all common misconceptions and false stereotypes. They're very unfortunate. We, as a society, we have to fundamentally change ourselves and change our perceptions about these mental health issues, these certain stigmas that we have. And so, the way that we change depression, the way that we change suicide, it comes from within. That's something that I can't emphasize enough, that it comes from within. And so, coming from within, it all starts with you. It all starts with every one of you here today. Our environment has the complete potential to be impacted by us. We influence our environments. So I ask you to be that change in the environment, for better or for worse. Please make it a positive experience. Together, we can love and care for those who have been impacted by suicide, and fundamentally change the stigma and stereotypes about suicide and depression, and physically change our society for the betterment of our citizens, for the betterment of ourselves. I personally have taken the pledge to be this better person, to be the listener, to be the friend, and to be open. I ask to start the revolution. Will you? Thank you. Just wanted to get some thank yous out of the way. First of all, camera woman Megan Harrison, wanted to give you a big thank you. She was the initial push for me to do this presentation, so if I hadn't had Megan come and say, hey, Dan, do this presentation, I probably wouldn't. So thank you very much, Megan. Lauren Burleson for hosting me, thank you very much. I really appreciate that I got to come here and speak to you all today. Christina, thank you so much. I mean, you're in my Issues in Living and Dying class. You know that we talk about this subject every week, and I feel like understand the struggle of probably most in here, so thank you very much. I really appreciate it. The JYM staff back in Munich, they probably won't see this, or at least they can see this on YouTube, but I wanted to give a formal thank you out to them. To Professor Dr. Hans-Peter Söder, Patricia Till, and Summer Forschner, the JYM staff, immer bin ich dankbar, dass ich Ihre Hilfe bekam. Also, wenn ich an das Tod meines Vaters erinnere und denke ich an das Erlebnis, bin ich immer dankbar für Ihre Hilfe. Mit meinem ganzen Herz danke ich Ihnen nochmal. And everyone else who has helped me be a friend through this entire experience, thank you so much. That is, you all have had a positive impact on me, and I hope to be a positive impact on you. So yeah, I'm done, so I'm open to any questions, anything, really. Yes, go ahead.
How long did it take you, once your father passed away, how long did it take you for that initial grief to continue on with your everyday activities without being affected by this? Is it still affected today?
I would say a few weeks. A few weeks. When I got back to Munich, it was very difficult, and I went to class. I tried to keep up with my homework assignments, and I tried to stay focused and just throw myself into my work. That was my coping mechanism. I wanted to throw myself into my work and just move on from there and try and almost pretend like nothing had happened. And I know that's not necessarily the right way to do things, but that's what I did. So that was roughly a few weeks. And every day now and then, of course, with this Saturday being the 1-year anniversary that he passed away, occasionally you'll have a day where I just, I can't focus on anything, and I can't necessarily get out of bed, or I can't do anything, and that's just a consequence of it, unfortunately. So it gets not necessarily easier as time goes on, but you just cope with it better. That's all I can say. Yes?
How are you doing now?
I'm good. I'm feeling well. It's, again, like I said, some days are hard, and I can imagine Saturday is just going to be one of those like recognition days, but it's much better than I was a year ago. So